So you've taken a practice test at this point, we assume, right? This is your second module for the English. So if you've done the practice test, the next step in our process is to do our corrections, see what are the questions we got wrong and why did we get them wrong. And again, with the English, we're more familiar with working with English every day. We speak English, we write text messages or emails. Maybe some of you even write letters. That's becoming a thing that is old now for many people. Most people don't write letters by hand anymore, but we used to do some of that back in the day. And I say all of that to say that when you finish the English test, when you do your corrections, now we're going to zoom in to see what are the different branches of the English ACT and what are some lessons. I want to quickly give reference to a book called the ACT 36 from Barron's, Aiming for the Perfect Score. Now, the textbook we're using is more the red book, right? This is the 2019-2020 edition. We're using the 2020-2021. A lot of similar things there. But the reason why you're noticing there's a different book now that we're going to reference, and there's actually quite a few books on the ACT. You probably know this at this point. But what I realized with getting or aiming for a very high score on the ACT is that there's a few things to keep in mind. You need a book that gives you practice. You need practice, right? The more you do the concepts, the more comfortable you get with the problems and the higher you can score. Number two, though, it's good to have a book that focuses on strategies. Now, some books do both. They give you strategies and they give you practice. But the ACT 36, I've read very good reviews. I've used it with quite a few students. And one of our tutors back in the day was able to summarize some highlights for the English section. Now, remember, for the math section, we give you tools for mastering mathematics. The book that I wrote, I wrote with Nathan Dressett. We give you the book by Tyler Wallace, an algebra textbook. We give you a pre-algebra textbook by Redwood's Pre-Algebra. Basically, we have textbooks that help us review the concepts that we need to review. And then we give you videos for every single concept on the ACT math section. So that is available to you as you go through this course. And you can always ask for more. If you feel like this topic is still a little tricky, can you get us a video on this? We will get you a video, okay? Now, if you've taken the English test, 75 questions, 45 minutes, you finish the test, feel free again to email me those scores so that I can keep track over time. It's only you who gets, I don't share a score with other people. So feel free to email me that so I can help you then see how you can improve or give any recommendations that might be necessary. So in this particular video, I'm going to go over some of the concepts on the ACT English, some of the things to keep in mind. There is a PDF. I'm editing it, a little bit here and there, but it's complete. I'm just adding a few more notes to it. And so if you want the PDF, let me know. But I will, as I said, the credit, we got a lot of those ideas for the English portion from the ACT 36. So let's look at some of the notes that our tutor put together. So we have over here, you probably see my screen with the different concepts. So I'm going to start from the very beginning, and we're going to go over these concepts step by step. Okay, so let's start with I'm going to move my screen up there away from the notes. Okay, there are 4 keys to the English section, and that's the first part. We have to keep it simple. Keeping it simple again is that the simple answer is often correct. Adding unnecessary words to a sentence does not help. Okay, that's just a general rule. When I wrote my first book, I remember giving it to somebody and I told him to give me feedback and what did he think about it. And one of the things he said to me was that you don't want to use unnecessary terms in an attempt to almost expand the length of your chapters. Don't be using words that are almost a duplicate of one another, right? You're putting them side by side and they mean the same thing. Well, why are you writing it twice? So he encouraged me with that, and that has stuck with me till today. It is not necessary to use wordy sentences. So if there's a shorter answer, right? If less is sufficient, a shorter answer, that is, you could pretty much consider it as one of your most probable answers to that problem. Less is better if less contains all that is necessary. Something to keep in mind. So keep it simple. The answer is often correct. The simple answer is often correct. Number 2, pace yourself. although you might feel rushed, you need to work at your own pace so that you do not overlook important details. So then I added that this will take time getting used to your specific pace. This is part of why a baseline test is important. It helped us to see how you handle the time component. If timing is not an issue for you, then it tells us that we need to focus more on the content, right? If you're finishing the test in 43 minutes or 42 minutes, you're finishing the test, time is not a problem, then let's zoom in on how are you handling each of the concepts on the English exam? Like how are you handling punctuation, sentence structure? Those are the things that we might zoom in on. Again, we are using, the red book for our practice. I'm giving you some strategies from the ACT 36 book, but if you finish the red book practice problems, there are other books that I recommend, and I can share that with you later, but do not hesitate to reach out if you want to look at more practice from different books, because the more practice you get from a variety of publishers, the better you're the higher your chances of doing better on the exam. Number three, the third thing that is important here is that you can skip when necessary. There are times when you're not sure of the answer. Feel free to put an asterisk and skip, but make sure you skip on your Scantron as well, so you don't skip number 2 and then put the answer for number 3 in the spot for number 2. You want to make sure you keep that. If you skip number 5, then make sure in your Scantron you skip number 5. Put an asterisk. When you hear that there's a few minutes left or whatever, make sure you go back and take an educated guess on the ones you skipped. Okay, you don't want to leave it blank, because you don't get penalized for getting the answer wrong. There used to be exams that you would get if you got the answer wrong, you would lose points. That's not the ACT. So please make sure that you go back at the end and finish all the ones that you have not completed. Okay, so skip when necessary. Don't be afraid again for the longer problems, and then you could come back. So not all the questions are going to use up 36 seconds, right? Because there's 75 questions in 45 minutes, and some of the questions are going to take less time. So keep that in mind. Okay, the next thing to remember is that try not to second guess yourself. Okay, sometimes you might you might choose an answer and then you second guess yourself, and then you change it, and then you realize your answer the first time was correct, right? If you can sound it out somehow in your head, of course in the center you can't talk out loud, I think it's important to try and see if the sentence makes sense, if it flows. Okay, so read the sentence out to yourself, replace. This is, of course, on the English test, you saw sentences underlined. Did it make sense if you tried option A or option B or option C? Sometimes when you hear something that is wrong, you can immediately say, yep, that sentence doesn't make sense. So make sure you pay attention to that. Yeah, use educated guesses as much as you can to eliminate the ones that are not valid answers. So this is the first sort of section of strategies to keep in mind on the English portion. We've looked at keeping it simple. We've talked about pacing yourself. We've talked about skip when necessary, and then try not to second guess yourself. Let me say something here quickly. When you look at the practice test on the ACT for any of the sections, especially the 4, not the writing as much, you want to keep in mind that, again, it's like a game. It's like you're trying to break your record in a sport. You keep track of, okay, this is how I did last time, and you go back and you practice hard. Maybe I can do better next time. Maybe I can do better next time, and so on and so forth. And so when you look at the ACT sections, keep in mind that the reason why I encourage you to practice, and hopefully you get up through 4 practice tests in our course. The reason why I recommend a lot of practice is because it helps you learn some strategies that are actually very specific to you, things that might work for you and how you handle the time that might not work for other students. This is very important to keep in mind. So please keep that in perspective as you practice. I'm not trying to remove a lot of your free time and other things you could be doing just for nothing. I'm trying to help you build a pattern that will help you see what works best for you so that you can use those strategies to go far. Okay, so that is those are some things to keep in mind. Let's look at the second set of sort of strategies to keep in mind, or second sort of reminders. Sorry, my screen is moving too fast. Okay, so number 2 of things to keep in perspective. Make sure to think in formal terms rather than informal, colloquial, or slang language. Who versus whom, for example. Okay, give me 1 second here. So we're gonna pause this, and I'm gonna just adjust my document. Okay, so make sure you think in terms of formal. Okay, now I know this might be hard because some people text with very informal language, right? But just make sure you try to keep it formal. So if you, who versus whom is a very classic example. If you can replace the word with he or she, then we use the word who. If you can replace the word with him or her, use the word whom, right? That is one thing that is very important, is again noting the relationship between who versus whom. You know, you think of this is the gentleman, or this is the boy John, whom we met last year, or who we met last year. Like, you look at those two situations, which one would you go with, right? That's just an example. So this is the boy John, who we met last week, or whom we met last week. You need to kind of see where those are different for different uses. That's one example. We're going to see more examples on this later. So keep that in perspective with who versus whom. Let me think of another example you can use with this one. Well, we are looking at examples, as I said, of who and whom. And so you think of an example here. To whom did you give the property? That is an example of whom. It sounds a little, you notice the formality, right? There's another example that comes to mind with comparing formal versus informal. When you think of informal, who did you give it to, right? Who did you give that property to? Versus to whom did you give it? You see, there's a formality with whom that we see. Now, so again, there's whom versus who difference. Keep that in perspective. Let me know if you have any other questions on that. When you think of the right answer, and I mentioned this earlier, but let's zoom into some of the bullet points. Does it sound right? When you think of the answer you're going to pick, does it sound right? Does it look right? Right? Does it look right with all the punctuation that needs to be in place? Does it sound right? That's something to keep in perspective as well. So those are two elements. Let's look at another two. Does it make sense? Right? So when you're looking at the right answer in English, we're asking, does this sound right? Right? If you could say it or read it out loud, that would be ideal. Unfortunately, you can't. But ask yourself, does it sound right? Does it look right? Does it make sense? It may help to imagine yourself saying a phrase aloud to answer that question, as we said, but you cannot, unfortunately, do that in a hall with multiple students. So just practice the art of sort of reading the sentences out loud in your own head. It sounds strange, but that is one thing to keep in mind. Okay, so that's those are some strategies to keep in mind. Let's look at a few more before we wrap up for the day. I want to say that I do have that practice test that you took, and if you have any questions on any one of the problems that you feel, you know, you got number 5 wrong and you feel like you should have it right, there's no reason why that could have been wrong. Let me know if you have any challenges, disputes on any of the problems with the answer that you had versus the answer that they said it should be. Let me know, and we can email or schedule a meeting to discuss those ones. Or we could bring it up at the webinar. When we have webinars, that's an opportunity to bring up concerns also with the webinar session. Okay, so quick makeup of the English test. As we've said before, there's 75 questions in 45 minutes. There are 5 passages with 15 questions for each passage generally. The English section does not test spelling or vocabulary. It is important for you to have good vocabulary and spelling skills, but on the specific test, that is not the focus of the test. So keep that in perspective. We're going to jump into punctuation now. We're going to look at a few of them now, and then later on we'll look at more. So let's start with commas. Commas are the most heavily tested punctuation in the English section. So let's look at examples of how to use commas. Okay, that's what we're going to look at now. So commas are we use them sparingly. There are often more commas than needed, so we have to make sure we know again the use of the comma. So let's look at a few examples. Don't use a comma unless the following are in place. Number 1, it separates introductory words from the main part of the sentence, right? Commas can be used in that context. After 7 hours of studying, comma, I went and bought pizza, right? That is an example. Over the years, we have noticed that students are studying for certain exams more. That's an example. Over the years, it's almost like I'm setting the stage. Over the years, comma, right? After that, comma, later, comma, those are examples. Number two, example of don't use a comma unless it sets off words or phrases that are non-essential to the integrity of the sentence. So when you think about this, like we give an example, or the example given to us here, Sam, my dorky younger brother, got knocked out after getting hit in the face by a softball. So notice that we put that piece of information there about Sam. Jonathan, as a result of a lost bet, wore makeup to a concert. That's just an example that they give. It goes on to say, again, it just gives an example of what is if you remove that, if it says Sam, right, Sam got knocked out after getting hit in the face by a softball. Notice that you can still have that sentence in place, but when you add that piece of information, my dorky younger brother, it just gives a little more context, right? So that's something to keep in mind, is that you could get more context by adding the piece of information there when we say my dorky younger brother. But without that information, the sentence is still complete. Another example of commas, it separates two independent clauses and you see one of the fanboys following it. Now remember, with independent clauses, independent generally means something that can stand alone, stand on its own. So it separates two independent clauses, and you can see one of the fanboys, right? Remember, the fanboys are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Those are the sort of different words there, and the fanboys is like an acronym to remember that. So I wanted to be a physical therapist, but I realized I was really bad at biology, right? Notice that but, right? So the comma before the but. I realized I was really bad at biology. So if something separates, if you see two independent clauses and fanboys involved, you see the place for commas. The next concept, or the next one, it separates words in a list of series, right? So there's a series of things here they use. I broke up with my girlfriend, shaved my head, and celebrated my 18th birthday all the same week. A series of things are listed there. And that's just an example again. Sorry, some of the examples are strange, but you get the idea of what is being said. They want you to understand using context. Generally, it's important. Again, we could talk more about life skills and life decisions later on if you're looking at some of these examples and it's making you think about life. Again, I've written books on those topics of life and relationships and friends, but these examples from the book are just they're getting you to think more deeply about how to use these things. So anyways, let's look at another example here. You see a verbal phrase at the end of a sentence, especially one that contains a verb plus ing, and the verbal phrase in question seems to refer to the entire sentence, not just to the word right before it. Barbara did well considering she hadn't studied at all, right? You see, Barbara did well considering she hadn't studied at all. So that's one example of a comma. Considering she hadn't studied at all, Barbara did well. Notice sentence meaning can change depending on the comma, right? Where the comma is, it can change that. Excuse me. So notice sentence meaning can change again based on the comma. We're going to look at a few more details with commas, and then we'll wrap it up today with this session with these ones. There's more to talk about, and we'll dive into that in the coming modules for English. So if you want to just zoom in on English and go through all the modules, we've looked at the first week you were doing the practice test. This is for your second module, and then you will have one for the third module as well. So let's look at a few more examples here. So I'm going to go back to our notes here. Notice sentence meaning can change depending on a comma, as we said. Mr. Spare offered rewards to students trying to improve their test scores. That's one example. Okay, now let's look at the other one. Mr. Spare offered rewards to students trying to improve their test scores. So notice in the first case, Mr. Spare offered rewards to students trying to improve their test scores. So you have some students who are trying to improve their test scores, right? And Mr. Spare offered rewards to them. Mr. Spare offered rewards to students trying to improve their test scores. That's almost like it's coming from Mr. Spare's perspective versus the other one where the students were actually trying to improve their test scores. We've talked about commas. We'll be looking more at, again, a few more things. We'll look at semicolons, which also deal with two independent clauses, but do not use fanboys, by the way. There's a few more comma rules. And actually, since we're dealing with independent clauses, let me see how far we want here. Well, let's go through the rest. I just want to show you the highlights. We're going to talk about apostrophes. We're going to talk about sentence. Let's see. Let me go back up here. Sentence structures, subject, verb, agreements. And then we have, let's see, tense agreement. And we have a few more things. Syntax and structure, very important. Just words and understanding the difference and the mistakes that people commonly make in using words. And yeah, that's a big part of what we'll be discussing when we come back. So keep that in perspective. Again, there will be more strategies. This is what we're looking at for now. Feel free now to dive into a practice. If you have time, you could do a little bit of practice of one of these sections, maybe 15 problems if you want. The idea is that you've gotten some strategies today, and you've maybe finished your corrections, look at the strategies we've discussed, and then if you can, read chapter 5 from the official ACT prep guide. So chapter 5 from the official ACT prep guide, that would be a good thing to do as well. Let's use up all the strategies that they provide for us in the official ACT prep guide, and then we can dive into the other books that talk about strategies. That was a lot of information to start us off there, but I mean, you're able to stick through, all the stuff. So keep up the good work, and please remember that practice. It's gonna pay off. Don't be discouraged if your baseline testing go as well as you wanted. So yeah, just finish. If you finish the video, read chapter 5, or at least review the chapter 5 from your official ACT prep guide, and then let me know if you have any questions, any comments, any questions, and then we will go ahead in our next module to look at more strategies, and you can watch that one as well if you want before you take your next practice exam. Thank you for your time, and have a great day.